Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marie, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's webinar. A heartfelt welcome to each of you for joining us as we delve into the topic Unlocking Tomorrow's Success, Streamlining Operation for Future-Thinking Businesses. So we are thrilled to have you here, and we deeply appreciate your taking time out your busy schedule to join us to participate. So our goal is to make this session both fruitful and engaging, and we hope you will gain valuable insights throughout the webinar. Now, before we begin, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. So all participants will be muted and your cameras are all turned off throughout the webinar to enable our speakers to present without interruption and, of course, for your privacy. And if your connection stops, just log off and log back in, and you'll be in the webinar room once again. Feel free to submit any question during the presentation using the Q&A function on your webinar screen. Please be informed that this session is being recorded and will be shared to the registered attendees after the event. So thank you for your cooperation, and let's make this webinar a smooth and enriching experience for everyone. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for today. So joining us is Rob Sheldrick, Head of Mid-Market Enterprise, Ndevr. So Rob is a nearly veteran of wholesale distribution and supply chain industries. So having started his career with what was once Australia's largest food producing company, Goodman Fielder. So while he thought that he might have been sales and marketing person, he eventually found his feet delivering business transformation internally. So he turned out to be pretty good at it and turned to be delivering modernization and transformation for other companies such as Qantas, Komatsu, Uncle Tubby's, Striggles, Amcor, Dalia, Monza, and Flory, just to name a few. So he says of himself that he has a passion for working with businesses to ensure they are future fit and ready to exploit leading edge business practices that the technology is yet to come. So today's agenda, so we'll start by discussing the key challenges that the businesses encounter in the current landscape and the emerging issues they may face in the future. So next, we'll explore the differences between point solution and comprehensive business solution and how they approach can impact organizational efficiency. We'll also delve into the strategies and practices that can help businesses adopt and thrive in a rapidly evolving environment. And also, this segment will cover critical aspects of compliance, security, and data access. And finally, we'll also discuss how effectively utilize reports and forecasts to support decision-making and strategic planning. So, Rob, this is a part of a series of webinars we've been delivering with you. So could you explain to our audience how we've gotten this stage?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Marie, and thanks for the introduction. So I guess from my point of view, I spend a lot of time having conversations with organisations about change and where they sit in the journey. And these sessions that we have today are a continuation of that, looking for us to engage and share some of the things that I've seen around the marketplace or the industry sets that hopefully you guys are working in. Today is very much about starting that conversation with some new people. I don't expect that today you'll get all the answers to every question, but hopefully it'll give you some things to think about and allow us to sort of get to the next conversation to go forward. It's all built on my personal passion that I have for future fit businesses. And what I mean by that, and it's work that Forrester's done previously, not myself, is organisations that really are able to build a foundation, be ready for the changes in the business impacts that hit them, and be able to really exploit that to be able to drive their business forward. So what we do know from the research Forrester did that future fit businesses tend to grow about 3.2 times faster than their peers in the same industry set. Now, does that matter? Yes. You know, if you're looking at where you're benchmarking against others, then you want to find the reasons that the others are doing much better, etc., or you be the one that's doing much better. So I hope that makes sense, Marie.
Definitely, of course.
So let me jump into just the conversation about what we're seeing. And look, the one of the things that impacts on the economy is obviously very clear at the moment. We're all very aware of interest rate impacts. People, just having less money to buy. But it's really weird because actually there is a large cohort out there that own their own houses, are actually in a good spot, are still able to go and travel overseas and so on. So it's that old two-speed economy conversation that's hitting there at the moment, but we're starting to see some of those impacts really take hold. And I saw in the last week there's a fresh food or prepared meals company that's gone bust and is no longer around. I further saw yesterday that a company that I bought some high-end audio equipment from has also gone bust as people start to rein in their spend. So there's some of these things that we have to consider. We've all obviously come through, I guess, the COVID reality the last number of years. And that was an interesting experience for us all as well, where I actually coined the phrase, and maybe I stole somebody else's, I'm not sure, about an 8-speed economy, where there were different people and organizations in that COVID time that were doing better than others. And really strangely, you would see similar organizations living in the same industry set having a totally different experience of what COVID was doing to them. Some were really exploiting it and doing really well. Some just didn't have the wherewithal to do that. And I think the logic behind that was that having some of those foundational things in place was an issue. But the point of this slide is really about there are a number of factors that you don't have control over as an organization. So if we think about supply chain that's been hitting us in the last couple of years, we obviously went through the COVID reality where supply chains were impacted by factories closing down in other countries. But we then moved into other things, like if you're in the building industry, timber became very hard to get hold of. Or if you're in the automotive industry, lead times to be able to resolve issues with parts and so on became 6 or 12 weeks when they used to be 2 weeks. And so that meant a lot of impacts on businesses as well. So the point of being successful is to be able to recognize you don't actually have control over these things. They are things you have to react to, and you need to control what you can control and actually manage those better. The last one that's in there, I do want to call out because it's going to be a conversation over time. There are step changes. So if we look at process automation or AI that is being broadly brought into the computer world or the systems world, it's much more than that though. AI is being broadly brought into the consumer and the buyer world. People are being armed with tools that they didn't have before to make different decisions or guided decisions based on AI decision making and so on. So we really need to understand not only that impact on our businesses and how we bring those solutions into our systems, we have to recognize the impact that that's going to have on people buying our products or taking our service, which is very different. So just a very quick example of that. I'm lucky enough to be heading off to Japan for a holiday later on this year. There's an AI tool that I've been able to access that I just put in some parameters and it's been able to build out my holiday and what I'm going to do on that. Now, no, I'm not sitting there verbatim taking everything it tells me, but what it's actually done is exposed a heap of tools or events that I can be doing in Tokyo that I wasn't aware of, and they fit with my criteria. So it's really important those changes are going to become different. The last thing I do want to talk about here is the buyer behavior changing out there and impacting what we do as businesses. So what we're seeing is that buyers are much more savvier than what they used to be. Less and less people just want to take the easy route. They have higher expectations on what we're going to be delivering them as a service. So an example of that for me is when people are on e-commerce nowadays and they're looking to buy a product, they absolutely want to know that inventory figure that's in there is correct and they can buy that product. They absolutely want to know that it says I'm going to get that delivery tomorrow before 2 p.m. and that's going to happen. There is less and less room for not meeting their expectations when you've set them. So we need systems that actually can both support that, but also react to the exceptions when they're not going to hit those things. What do we do about that, and how do we handle that situation with our consumer or our customers in general? So I hope that all makes sense, Marie.
Yeah, so I think, Rob, you're talking to a lot of businesses that are Are there any common themes to what you think they need to be focused on?
Yeah, look, absolutely. One of the largest themes for me is that I meet a lot of organizations that are still in their journey. Maybe they're running zero or count right or something like that when they were $1 million business, but they're 20, $30 million business or greater. They've grown up over time by, patching together solutions by using various things that are out there. And they're convincing themselves that it's okay. They're actually spending a lot of labor hours making this thing work and so on, but that's what they've known for the last 5 or 10 years. So, in my view, that there's a lot of businesses that just need to step back and say, it's not okay. We need to do something about this. And whether it's going to break tomorrow or it's going to cost us more money in a month's time, we need to build a better platform and so on. So, the themes that we then talk about in the marketplace, the people I talk to, is about scalability. And one of the questions I have around scalability is, if your business doubled in size from a revenue perspective tomorrow, how would you handle that? What would you do? And if we're having open conversations, a lot of people will certainly come to me and say, well, we put on some more people in the warehouse, or we'd have a greater sales force. But putting extra people into the conversation is not actually the best answer. It might be in certain areas. So if you're selling increases, you might want a bigger footprint with salespeople in the field, etc. For me, it's more about how do we embed some processes that are repeatable, automated, and so on, to allow for that scalability. Because what you want to do is you want to grow in double the size, but not double the cost. You want to start making margin, because not further along the line is a competitor is going to be competing on price, and you need to have that room to move and so on. Certainly flexibility is one of the conversations I certainly hear from people today, that whether that's an obvious thing like COVID, where they have to pivot on the spot and do something different, or whether it's just actually recognizing that actually somebody has disrupted my industry set and what they offer is not the same. So, for example, more and more e-commerce solutions are offering, spend a certain amount of money and freight is free and so on. So you still have to pay freight. There's still something that has to be organized there. So, how do you build a model that actually makes the processes more efficient to allow you to offer that? Because your competitors are going to be doing that stuff. And the last one in this set that's really important for me to call out is the real-time nature of business. That there is no doubt that understanding an event has taken place as early as possible allows you to do something about that event. So the example for me is, if we're placing a sales order and we don't have the stock in the warehouse, and we don't know that, traditionally that's popped up at a report at the end of the week, and there's an out of stock number, and gee, we lost that sale or whatever happened. What you actually want it to happen is, when the sales order is being put into the system recognizes that we're out of stock. So first of all, you need a system that's got accurate stock to be able to do this. And it proposes an opportunity to say to that person, that customer, hey, we haven't got size 7s in blue, but we have them in red. Would you like the red one? So back at the event taking place, we can do something about that. So to do that, well, you need the real-time side. And then when you think about KPIs, dashboards, reporting, their value is being able to see what's happening in the business on the spot. So the way I like to think about dashboard reporting, for example, is I want to come into my business on a Monday morning, turn on my system, look at my dashboard and see what's going on. It should be telling me where I need to focus my efforts on before 10 o'clock, and working out the exceptions that need to be solved to allow me to work back around those things. So what I'm seeing in the marketplace is, talking to people in their businesses, they're a bit behind the ball in a lot of cases. They're running older systems. They're running systems that were meant for smaller business types, and therefore process issues that weren't as vast and so on. And they really need to get that foundation sorted out. Oops, sorry, I think I went too ahead there. So coming back to, what does it mean as far as things that are now hitting our businesses, the things that we need to focus on, and so on. And some of these are really game changing. So AI is one of those ones that stands out for all of us, and something we need to be very aware about. And as I said, the AI conversation is twofold. It's both on how do we bring AI into our world and make our processes efficient and leverage it accordingly, but also recognizing that customers and consumers that we deal with are also using AI in their world more effectively. And it's, creating a focus for how they do things. So what AI means at the moment is that there are organizations, ERP organizations right now that are embedding those AI solutions into their actual ERP solutions. And the way you see that is things like, say, dunning letters are being automated through the process and going out to people and tell them that they need to pay some money. But they're less templated. They're more specific about that customer journey and using the information, say, from the CRM solution to leverage and be able to be more personalized around what they need to do. It's allowing you to create text, obviously, about what's going on, but there's also things like, let me talk about AP, for example, having an AI solution receive things through an email, being able to assess that document that's been attached is actually an invoice. It is actually something we need to pay versus an erroneous thing that's come through that might be, say, a loading document or something like that. Or worse, it might be something that's we need to not worry about because it's a scam, etc. So AI has a role to play there. So if we think about AP automation and some solutions I'm working with today as such, there's a focus on assessing that information coming through before the human being gets to it, to ask questions like, well, is it the same bank account that we had? If not, maybe something's going on here. Is it a trend of the same amount of money that we've been paying this supplier over the last year, etc.? Is it an outlier? But it also has the ability, AI, to look at other external solutions or factors and bring those to bear. So maybe from a fraud point of view, we want to see that there's some government things that record information that we assess as well. So the intent being that AI is driving information to put in front of individuals who can then make deeper decisions about them. And over time, again, with machine learning and so on, we start learning about these factors and corral them earlier in the process. I think the other thing that's also really important is that machine learning. So it's hard to blur the line sometimes between what's going on, but systems have had now for quite a long time the ability to learn as they go through. So OCR is a great example of that. When you've got character recognition of a document coming through and which elements of information I would like to use, OCR teaches itself that, oh, okay, I'm used to actually getting this information in the top left-hand corner, 3 rows down, and so on. So now I've learnt that. I look for that every time I get this from this supplier or this customer if it's an order and so on. So there's quite a few things that are coming through there. But without trying to spend today going through all of the technology changes that are coming, the point really is that there is continually and always will be emerging technologies. And some of them may feel a bit interesting. One of that is really going to happen. But some of them, like AI and machine learning, are absolutely being leveraged and being brought forward as such. Hope that makes sense, Marie.
Of course, Rob. So how do you know what is best for your business model?
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess the answer to this is a personal one, and I'm happy to have further conversations with people in this session. But I think at some point in your journey, you outgrow the multiple solutions, and it's a bit funny that I've dealt with large organisations, a very big beer company over times that. When you're small and when you're large, maybe these things can make some sense to have best of breed solutions like. But with large organisations, I'm talking about billion-dollar plus organisations, they can invest in middleware and concepts, but with costs of $1 million plus dollars a year to keep these going, to actually mimic what a single solution could do. Where I'm really driven personally is unified solutions make much more sense. And there are going to be some exceptions to this rule, and I'll talk about a couple of those going forward. But for me, it's about recognizing that we need to be better, and how we get better is by having a consistency of the data. So ideally, you want to be dealing with one enterprise resource planning solution or ERP solution. That is the database, the single database. It looks at information in the same way, and it provides the processes you need to support. Further to that, it also actually embeds some of the best practices into those processes. So as I say to a lot of people, there isn't a lot of IP in paying your suppliers as such. So having a best practice and letting the system decide how best to do that you've deployed makes a lot of sense. And yet we still get people that might use, say, Xero or something like that as a business finance system, who then go and get a purchasing solution to manage their POs and automate the process of supplier payments. And then they'll have yet another system that does inventory, and try and work out how we get these solutions to actually talk to each other in a viable way. And the viable bit's really important, because even where you've got, so Xero talks to an inventory system quite regularly, there's still differences around foreign exchange and some of those other things that come to play in the way that they calculate in the two systems. So you never ever align that foreign exchange dollars for imported goods as such. You have to write something off and you have to do work to understand it. So where I'm definitely driven from my personal view is that businesses are better off with a single unified solution. Until it doesn't make sense, and this is I guess the point for me, is there is a time that best of breed solutions can make sense. So I'll give you an example from my experience. If we're dealing with health practitioners or allied health organisations, there are a couple of really good best of breed solutions that deal with doctor's appointments, linking to Medicare automatically. ERP solutions today are not necessarily great at that. So, for that conversation, we would expect that the operational system would be that best of breed solution today. 5 years' time, 6 years' time, ERPs continue to grow into different industry sets. They may well look at solving that problem as such. So I think that's an example where the value is just so high, the fit for what your business needs to do makes sense. But for many people on this session today, it's almost a challenge to show me where a best of breed solution is going to actually be better for you. And I'll give you a further example of that. If we're talking about CRM being inbuilt into an ERP solution, it just naturally captures information as you transact, or that old favorite that marketing people love, the customer journey. So when we started with a quote for a suspect and turned them into a customer, and then seeing all those interactions captured in the system naturally as such, or natively, it just makes so much more sense than having an add-on. And there's some solutions out there that are quite good, like HubSpot, Salesforce, etc., and they have their place, don't get me wrong. But in an ERP, they have to have a lot of value for me to view the CRM world isn't better off being embedded. Because what you do want to do is sit here in, say, 6 months' time and be able to follow a train of thought or follow a data review and be able to see all those bits of information together, rather than have to go to multiple systems and work those out. But furthermore, there's information that gets captured in that customer journey that becomes part of the KPI review or part of your dashboards, etc. So having that all in one system certainly for me makes a lot of sense. So, I guess today's conversation is very much to talk to the point solution versus unified solutions and the value that's there. So if you ask me to put a figure on it, 80% of the time, I think it's a no-brainer that we should be driving towards a unified solution to improve our processes, and I'll go through the why in that. But we also recognise there are occasions where it does make sense. So I have a couple of customers that run a labour hire world, and as it sits today, there's a couple of good solutions in that space, and we do definitely bring the financials into my ERP world and a few other things as such. But even then, there's issues around that. So we bring in summary information from the labour hire system into the ERP, so it constrains in the ERP how we look at the business and what's going on. And of course, the ERP is the management cockpit for the business. So, what I would be doing is, if you're going to be using a point solution, have them down to as few as possible. Don't, make sure there's a case for having it. And then when you unify it into the solution, connect it through the solution, go as deep as you can with the data, making sure you bring as much across as possible. Now, that has its own issues, but with APIs, the way they are today, there's certainly an ability to do that. So I hope that makes sense again, Marie.
Thank you, Rob, for elaborating. So absolutely, that's makes sense. So, Rob, the businesses are seriously wondering what to make of the current technology landscape. So we've gone from everyone talking about process automation to everyone talking about AI in a very short space of time. So I think most people are wondering what massive changes and upheavals are around the next corner.
Yeah, okay. So I think first of all, there will continue to be upheaval and change as there always has been. I think about where ERP went for me many years ago in the manufacturing world. There was a real focus on if you were dealing with Coles or Woolworths, you needed to have really solid demand forecasting tools in place, and you still do if you're dealing in that space. But what I find interesting globally in manufacturing a few years ago, that there was an abrupt, I guess, recognition that actually all that's great. We do need to plan and do all those detailed things and so on. But actually, there's a fundamental in manufacturing. We need to keep things flowing. And so recognizing where the bottlenecks were and understanding that flow was constrained, without doing a lot of heavy lifting and thought process and so on, we could go in and go, okay, there are things that are slowing down. They must be costing us money. Without actually doing the detailed costs in there. So manufacturing globally actually introduced that concept to understand where flow was constrained and saw that as a thing. Now, whether that be a new product development, how fast can we get that to market, will be better off. Whether that be throughput through a manufacturing cycle, we don't have parts available to complete the manufacturing. It really doesn't matter. It's more about recognizing that we have an event real time and we need to do something about it, or even better, recognizing from a forecasting point of view that event's going to take place in 3 weeks' time. How do we short track and solve that and so on? So the other thing that's really important for ERP solutions in this conversation for me is that APIs have been out there now for quite a while. There's very different mechanisms of getting information in between systems and so on. But what we're seeing is that connection to the B2B world of using things like APIs or other technologies to be able to bring information from one system to another. So removing the manual, I'm going to ring somebody up and tell them I want some of this, taking the purchase order concept and turning that into a requirements in your system. There's a lot of tools that are tried and tested now around the API side. Now, look, I've got to be honest from my experience, everybody's API seems to be a little bit different in flavor, and I'm sure there's some technical people on this solution that can talk to things better than me in this space, but they do work and they do have a fundamental view. But equally, we've got technologies now around queries and so on in ERP solutions that allow us to schedule and work with CSV or data loads between systems in a very effective way too. So it's the right thing that makes sense to you. Certainly, one of the trends that is really strong is data. I think we've all recognized data, but centralizing that view of data and be able to use that data in a real sense makes sense. So the core to that, and it always has been this case, by the way, is having consistency and accuracy. So we see this with organizations that move to an ERP. So I've got one today. I won't say the industry set in case they're on this session, but we're just setting up customers, and we've got a data load concept that fill in these bits of information about a customer, and we'll load into system, and you've got customers. Sounds pretty easy. On their side, they've recognised, and maybe they always knew this, but didn't sort of say it outright, that they've got 4 different views of the same customer. And what's really interesting is that those views are not always consistent. So, when we're actually now trying to cleanse that data, as you do in developing the ERP solution and putting it in place, they're dealing with issues that they probably should have dealt with a long time ago. So, some of those might be as simple as having different payment terms on the two customers. Some of those might be having shallow views versus deeper views of that customer, and therefore, depending on the end user who's looking at which system, they wouldn't see consistent information. But certainly, from our point of view, we're a big driver around having consistent single location of accurate data and be able to see that. And of course, that builds over time through standardization and so on. So I think the other thing is workflows that are quite strong. So if we're comparing towards moving from financial business systems into the world of ERP, more and more over the last number of years, ERPs have really got onto the workflow train. So what that means is that if you can understand the workflow that needs to be set up, or better yet, your solution comes with that inbuilt workflow in the system itself with the business rules, some things just can flow and you don't need to touch them. So the best example I have in this space, and yet a lot of people still don't do it well, is that if you're purchase order driven in what you require from your suppliers, and when your purchase orders go out and they come back as receipted goods, if they match, then why do you need to worry about it? So you've already set the requirements at the purchase order stage. You can actually automate through workflow all of the steps right up to paying the actual supplier invoice. So if you've got 3 cartons of blue widgets, whatever they may be, they come in as 3 cartons of blue widgets, and you can even have 4-way where you've inspected the goods and so on. Why would you want to pay somebody in your business to sit down and go through an approvals process for paying the supplier invoice? You've already done that in theory in the purchasing process. So that's where good ERP systems today actually cover off that workflow and allow that to take place. The other thing that I think is important is that, depending on where you're going, you might be dealing with larger organizations that will impose things on you. So I've got a history working with Coles, Woolworths, or Safeway, go about that sort of age, etc. And they love you to death while you're a little guy coming into the category and introducing your jams or whatever it may be, and then you grow as a business, and then they say, enough of this, you need to get in line. And they impose EDI on you. And of course, generally on your side, that can be quite a cost impost to actually put in place and so on. But today, those solutions are available and more achievable, and they're repeatable because people that provide that are either in the ERP solution itself or have worked with the ERP solution for a long time. And so I think that's that concept for me of having a single integrated solution gives you a better chance of sitting on the shoulders of those that have gone before you. And so you can actually just leverage what they've done and put those in place as the solution. So EDI is a good example of that. You don't have to learn about EDI. You just go do what everybody else has been doing with Coles and Woolworths and put that in place. You don't actually have to learn about fraud detection when we get into supplier payments and so on. There's stuff out there that's been done. And generally it flows down from what I call the big boys, the blue chips that have invested their millions of dollars and made a process work. It brings it down into ERP solutions. So we deal with mid-market ERP focused solutions. The good news is those solutions also deal with very large blue chip organizations across Australia and the globe for that matter. And that's the other thing that I just wanted to touch on about the globe. The global nature of what we are today means that some of the things that are being put in front of us, so e-invoicing with PEPOL, etc. Wow, what's all that going on? I'm still not sure I'm 100%, but I kind of get it's about data again. That's been in the UK for 10 years. Solutions have been doing that for a long time. So having good solutions that are impact and reflect global changes already mean that those things are embedded and ready to go, or there's a solution just around the corner to be put in place there. So for me, that makes sense. So just to close this conversation out, and the slide for me, automation is what it's all about. We're looking to leverage these solutions, automate what makes sense, and provide real-time information and clarity to an organization itself.
All right. So Rob, thank you for sharing that context and providing some more elaboration. So if things are being automated am I actually losing and increasing my risk of doing business?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting concept, and I understand the basic fear about I used to do something, and this is at an individual level or an organizational level, and needing to sit back and sort of hand that over to somebody else. I think it's the opposite, actually. I think what happens when you automate things is you get to focus on exceptions and the things that aren't broken, that are just working. So again, take my purchase order example. If you've got a purchase order, you put for 3 cartons of widgets that are blue and 3 cartons come in spec. Why wouldn't you automate that? Why do you need to actually have a process? And in fact, you've got some guy probably scanning the goods in. So we're automating that process of getting the data on a receipt note. For me, that just makes sense. What we want those guys to do, though, is handle the exceptions. So 2 cartons of blue came in and 1 red. Okay, well, let's manage that and actually sort that out because it needs to be resolved. In an impact side of business, what we're trying to do with for me, ERPs, automation, and workflow is very much sort of leave the stuff that's working to just run through and continue flowing, right? That works. Focus on the things that need improvement. And then what it actually does is it frees you up to actually focus on strategy, focus on improvement, try things. The old fail forward is still a legitimate concept of, we want to go into a market. Oh, that didn't work. Let's go into a different market in a different way. But what you find today is that people are still stuck in the day-to-day management of the business. And that's what they think the business is. The business is not about that. That's just the normality of the business that needs to be managed in some way, but automated as much as possible to let you focus on what the next 2 months looks like, the next 2 years. The 5-year plans are bloody hard to do nowadays. That depending on the industry set you're in, but I'd say at almost every one, things evolve so fast now that you can put your plans down, and you should. You can manage your KPIs around those plans, but you need to be able to see what's happening and making adjustments. And I pull out the old story because it's still a great one about the moon landing, and I think it was only for 3% of that whole trip that the actual rocket was on its way towards the moon. For 97% of that trip, that they were making adjustments to readjust. And why would they do that? Because things were impacting out of their control. And they had to move around. So they still got to the moon, they still got success. So businesses like that as well, things you can't control for COVID. You can't control for lead times. If we take the recent issues with supply chain, one of the fundamental things that just blew me away about 1.5 years ago was we couldn't get containers into Asia or Australasia for that matter, because the US had sucked up 2/3 of all the containers into their world to make sure they could keep their lead times going and so on. So I wouldn't have sat down and worked that out in advance that, well, the issue is not having the parts or the want of a supplier to give me those parts. The supplier just doesn't have the containers. And then for those on this call that were around that, we all understood that suddenly there was these extra costs around containers. And then there were spurious things around containers like, what do you mean you had to clean it again? People were laying cost on top of cost because they could get away with it. So they're things you can't predict, and you just have to sort of react to. I think the other thing is the scalable bit. I'm a really large person on scalability. Scalability comes in a number of different factors. So one is that if your business grows to double the size, can you actually put the processes in place to support that? Can you put on more people, whatever the answer may be? And obviously, I'm not against putting on people, but you want to have processes that are automated where it makes sense to not have to scale to that. But it's also about functionality. What actually happens is as you grow, you don't just do more sales orders, you introduce different concepts where EDI becomes one of the areas you have to do, or people are saying, actually, I want you to get my orders from a portal that I'm putting. So if you're dealing with Reese, for example, in plumbing world and so on, and a supplier, that they'll put stuff down into a portal, you have to go get it. They're not going to send you an order anymore and so on. So you need to scale your processes to be able to do that. And obviously you can do that manually for a while. the business grows and the manual stuff starts breaking, but you want to automate that. So it's in a portal. Let's get the file. Let's suck that file into our ERP system and understand that. So scalability comes from functionality as well as processes and people. And the big one for me around the value here is the live feedback. I personally cannot understand how people want to wait for a month to understand how the business is going. And I have some of those challenges too in my business, I'll be honest. But wherever we can, we want to be closer to the event taking place or being able to recognize at any point where the business is at. So the only way you can do that is to have that good data captured regularly on a timely basis and be able to present that forward and visualize where the business is going. So if you've got a KPI that says you want to have, for example, 80% of your budget for that period of time by week 3 of a month, then you need to see whether you're hitting that so you can do something about the last week, whether that's run some promotions because that makes sense, or whether that's just get people out there talking to customers to say, hey, we need to bring a bit forward. And you can't solve every problem, but what I do know is you can't solve a problem you don't know about. And that's what this is about, right? This is not about perfection. This is about visualizing everything that goes on. And the other part of this, and I'll come to this, I think, in a little more depth, is when you've got information that is provided to you, people in your business have different perspectives. So it isn't about the finance manager seeing the same as the supply chain manager, seeing the same as the sales manager. What it is about, though, is when they're looking at their different perspectives, it's built on the same data. So you're not ending up with erroneous information or differences, but you can see the business the way you need to manage your part of the business. So again, Marie, does that make some sense?
Oh, absolutely, Rob. So thanks for the insight. And of course, we really appreciate the explanation. So Rob, so if I'm putting everything into one system and automating everything, how do I know that the important stuff isn't actually getting overlooked? So, or how do I know if someone is trying to really commit a fraud?
Yeah. So interesting question around fraud. So first of all, some of the answer is you don't necessarily stop things happening in some cases. So if it's internalized, somebody in your organization is making steps, what certainly you can put some risk profiles in place. So, we have AP raising things, and maybe as a purchase order and somebody else pays that purchase order. So there's a separation of duties concept. You can build system controls in, and systems, good ERP systems do this well today. You can be really right down to a part of the GL that people can see or can't see, and so on. So restrictions and security are a big part of what ERPs offer you as such. But there's also the external influences. So where fraud is tending to happen today is examples where, we all see it. We get some strange link, or we get an email, and I walk around businesses, and those emails are as effective as anywhere else. Oh, you haven't paid, just hit this link and so on. So what we want to do is bring in automated processes that actually have some standard rules deployed. So, I talked earlier about the supplier payments and having a solution that does actually look around fraud, and it looks for, different bank accounts, because that's one of the things that they do, right? They send you through a different bank account. They look for the strange spending patterns or payment patterns. So, they've averaged $5,000 a month for the last 3 and 4 months, and suddenly there's this $60,000 one. Or even the other way, suddenly there's this $350 one, because that's a good trick with these guys when they're trying to do things. I think the integrity around the data, though, helps with that. So one of the things, if you're going to have inbuilt algorithms and logic, having your data being correct is important, because how can we run the rule that says, oh, it's a different bank account, if we don't have clarity around what is the bank account, etc. I think compliance is a big part as well. There's more and more requirements coming through from the government, whether that be STP type things, or you're dealing with contractors and you have to report on that depending on your size. There's a lot more things coming through. So e-invoicing, although I don't see a lot of it still yet, because I don't deal with a lot of government side of things, but that's definitely coming in, and it's just another way of the government being able to, I'm not anti-government, by the way, but it's a way of the government be able to track transactions and understand what's going on. That's where the value is for those things. So they're becoming embedded in solutions moving forward. I've got to be careful here because I don't want to suggest that no matter what systems you run, you don't run the risk of a scammer or somebody intruding into your system and taking control. In fact, I just yesterday got a contact from Camplify, that do rental of caravans and so on, requesting me to go and update, or requesting everybody to go and update their passwords. Now, they didn't say anything about what was going on. They just said, "Oh, need you to update your passwords," part of our normal process. I know exactly what's happened. Somebody's got into their system and they're trying to be ahead of the curve to get those changes. And I don't know anything about what their systems are and so on, but it's going to happen. And if you look at the real world, Telstra, Optus, and big companies can have their issues as such, then we want to be with the best systems that can work on it. So one of the things about, for me, good ERP systems in this space is that they're generally sitting on top of Amazon, or they're sitting on top of Azure or Oracle, as far as their platform for the cloud. And again, I'm never going to tell you that they can never be intruded on, or there's nothing happen there, but they're more likely to be able to handle the changes in the coming times than having an enterprise solution of the old days sitting in your server out the back. And there's a bit of a fallacy out there for people that are running on premise that somehow you're protected. In fact, more and more we're seeing on-premise being where people are targeting. So I think this is a really important part of where you're talking about cloud solutions. They offer an updated nature regularly. So something happens with an attack elsewhere in the world, and they're immediately in the system that night if they're significant enough. Does that make sense from a data and security point of view? I think this is where you want to actually have one system that is embedded with strength, rather than having multiple systems that can actually expose you if one of those is not as good as the other ones. So just jumping ahead as to the payback around the concept. So I won't spend forever on here, but I'm really excited to have conversations about this area, because why we do all this, why we talk about a single unified solution and having improved automated processes and workflow and so on, is to be able to visualize on the spot how the business is going against your KPIs or other metrics that are in place. So what they do deliver, unified solutions, from my perspective, is an ability to do that. Press a button, real time, see what's going on. More than that, have the system send you alerts when certain conditions are met to let you know that has happened and so on. So most systems have reasonable reporting today. What you want to have is really strong reporting. You can be, in this case, you can be flexible in how you build out things that are important to you. So dashboards that are in the system that are real time, but you can apply the different things you want to understand. You can personalize those by different functional leads within the business, or even different individuals. So we see regularly that we have a financial controller's dashboard, and we go back into organizations after they've gone live and worked with it, and they're sitting there with two people, effectively the same accounting role, and both of them have very different focuses in the business and therefore have different dashboards. So, having that data at its core source, accurate, singular, as one place that it comes from, makes all this stuff much easier. Now, you can have integrated systems that make sense and still get certain data elements into our world and be able to report on those, but accurate live data in one system is always going to be the best way. And then what you actually want to do for your reports is drill into them. It's not good enough they're showing you something, or the dashboards alerting you something. You want to follow the trail and actually drill into the data and right into maybe that sales order or that manufacturing step, etc., to understand what was going on in a better sense. And so there's an investigative nature that is turned on by other folks. So let me come back to the automation part of this conversation. If you're going to do that, investigate things and follow them up and review it, you need to have time to do that. So what we need to happen is that automation handles the bulk of the business and makes sense of that. And you can't automate everything, but you can automate a lot of things that are repeatable in businesses today. So collaboration is the last point I want to make here that I think is really valid. Having an ERP, a unified single solution, is much better for collaboration. So what you tend to find is when people are running 3 or 4 different systems, you sit in maybe a sales and operations planning meeting once every fortnight, depending on when you do those. People use their own system, then they come and talk different languages in the one session. Not pointless, but you spend a lot of time just harmonizing what you're saying to each other. What you actually want is to have people collaborating as things are happening as such. Now, not just noise, so not telling them something's happened, I'll be aware of it, but if you're building out a purchase order and you want somebody's input on what should be added to that, because you get a container, it takes 8 weeks to get there, having a mechanism to have maybe 2-step approvals where somebody can finalize their part as well. It might simply be just to get information back on a report with somebody advising you, but collaboration is much more empowered when we get into that. Again, I hope that all makes sense, Marie.
That is truly enriching and insightful, Rob. So one of the big issues that comes up with automation is, am I going to lose my job to a robot? So how do you address that, Rob?
Yeah, no, look, it's a great question, and it's a genuine fear out there. And look, I've got to be open. Part of the conversation here is there are some individual roles that may not be required when you automate things. It depends on your business. But we more look at this conversation from a couple of different aspects. It's about scalability. So it's about setting yourself up for growth. And I don't even mean ridiculous W size growth. It might be 10, 15%, because that small growth factor is enough for systems to break and processes to not deliver, and you have more issues with your customers. So for us, it's about scalability and taking those individuals and sharing with them what we're doing. So one of the key things I would say for people is take them on the journey. Don't hide from the fact. So if you're moving into an ERP solution, say from a zero plus a couple of other things, and somebody's been that person that's had the role to be there to physically go downstairs and check you got the stock because the inventory system didn't tell you the right answer, and then they come back, and so you got the opportunity to go from 8 people in customer service to 6 people, then be open about that. Not the 8 goes to 6, but this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how we see this working. You'll get enough churn in your business generally that you'll account for some of those changes. But really, when we're talking about growth and supporting scalability, what we often find happens is it's not about getting rid of people, it's about needing to employ less people when you actually go through those spurts. So for me, that's really important. The other thing that's important in this conversation from my point of view is that you're asking people to trust you as to where the business is going, and that's what we generally have is a need to sort of take direction, lead the business where it needs to go, so these people are sustained. And people like that. People like to think the business is going forward. So one of the fundamental things we know with, and I'm not sure of all the generations on the people on this call, but people want to work for more than just money today. They want to work for being passionate about something. They want to work because they think they're making a difference. So being able to explain where people sit in that. So if we talk about automation in this example here of, maybe we used to have somebody sit there on a Friday night, check all the invoices before they went out. That person doesn't need to check those invoices if they match up with the purchasing side, right? What they probably can do is focus on chasing the slow payments that are going on and improve that side of the world. So there's other things in a business that need working on. So freeing them up to do high value opportunities rather than having them do drudgery as such. And some of the things that you see in business today, depending on what you've got in your settings, can be things that other people are going, why have you created this role to fix a problem that's ongoing? Why don't we fix the problem and actually have a better process and so on? So, if you've got warehouse and your inventory solutions probably not up to scratch, or you've got e-commerce solutions and you don't update the stock in that on a real-time basis, then you're handling all those exceptions. So if we take the e-commerce platform example, you're dealing with orders that are going out to a customer, but you don't have the stock. that creates a lot of noise, a lot of effort, and a lot of cost, and so on. Having it accurate to start with means you don't have people that need to do that. They can be doing other things. But there's definitely a reality here that it is about reducing cost. That's one of the flavors of automation. So it's consistency, it's getting on top of your processes and have them from a quality point of view working better. But it's also about, those things shouldn't demand the costs that it may be used to. So if we think about EDI between you supplying Woolworths and Coles, yes, it does get imposed on you at a certain level, but the whole point is it's pretty frictionless. It's as you deliver things or have a sales order ready to go, they're getting an ASN beforehand, so they know what stock's coming in. They can sort out any issues with what they need. It becomes a logical saving for an organisation as well. Unfortunately, Woolworths and Coles want all that money back, but that's a different discussion as such for a business. It's helping you. So I think the people question is often it's a bit overdone around you're automating my job. We're rarely automating their job. We're more automating those low value parts of their job or the drudgery part of their job to free them up to do other things as such. And again, I think the underlying comment here should always be, as we grow, we don't put on people rather than we necessarily go out there and reduce people. Having said that, economic world is economic world, and you've got to make business decisions. So if you do have to make cuts to the business, you're better off having processes that sustain those cuts rather than not having those processes and those cuts happen anyway, and you can't keep up with the business as it is. Right?
Yeah, so I think Rob is now happy to take questions. So for those who have just tuned in, so please keep sending your questions, and we'll actually discuss this in a minute. So, and thank you for those who actually have submitted their question earlier. So let's open the floor now to our Q&A session. So for our first question, I guess, Rob, you already have discussed this earlier, and you have touched this topic too. So the question goes, there are various ERP products exist in the market. Is there any specific product you're referring to, or can opt for any ERP product like Oracle, SAP, etc.?
Yeah. Okay. It's a good question, and I probably in this session won't name products for the moment, but happy at one-on-one that we focus on some mid-market products that we think make sense for various reasons. I use the terms, or I try to use the terms, good ERP regularly, because not all ERPs are the same. And I think, and I didn't come to this overnight, it's taken me a few years in my journey to get to this. I personally believe that there is a strong value from cloud ERP solutions, and there's different elements of the value around that over having today having an ERP that's on site or whatever else, and there's a number of reasons for that. I'm happy to go through that with whoever this person is in more detail, but I just feel that the investment, withstanding everything else, the investment that software companies are willing to make is very much focused on cloud solutions. So what that means is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're running an on-premise ERP, and I'm talking to the mid-market space, if you're sitting there running SAP and your Goodman Fielder or your Qantas running Oracle big end of town and so on, you generally have millions of dollars in the bank to actually manage that. It's a bit different, right? But for us in the mid-market space where I work on, very much it makes sense to be able to have a cloud solution. Now, a few reasons for that make sense. One, I believe the security and, depending on what they use as their backbone, so we deal with a solution that uses Amazon Web Services as the backbone, another one that uses Oracle as the backbone. They're both up to kit, where you look at some other ERPs that might be in the marketplace and so on, that their backbones might not be the same, particularly if they're not a cloud solution. The other thing is that there's a level of new ideas are introduced fast in the cloud world. So whether that be risk, as in let's put in a risk reduction because we know that this is an exposure now, or whether that just be there's AI stuff coming through and how fast can we get in there. Now, I will add to that though on the AI bit. I've been really pleased with the ERP companies that I deal with that they're taking a cautious approach. So they are trying to get AI embedded as fast as possible. They've done some great stuff, but they're also running the ruler over common sense in that space. I sat in another ERP session earlier in the year, and they extolled the virtues of AI and showed how this information can go out as a PDF and be assessed by AI for certain information. And then I sort of put my hand up and said, so where is it, this in Australia, the session, where is that going? Oh, it's going off into, this platform here. I said, that platform in Australia, or is that in US or, Asia? And the answer was it was in Asia, right? Now, don't know that's an issue in its own right, but governance tells us that if we're handing over to different parts where we don't control the data, that itself might be an issue. And that's one of the things about AI, is that where they're getting their learning from, we need to be clear. So what I'm seeing in the good ERP space is that they're managing that and looking into those risks on our behalf. They won't always be perfect, by the way. And no ERP is perfect. But, again, for this person, I'm happy to have a chat about what I believe are the right ERPs for the right circumstance.
All right, thanks, Rob. And to our audience, we thank you and we really appreciate your questions. So just like Rob says, Rob is happy to take a one-on-one discussion if you need more clarification. So let's proceed to the next question. So there are So the next question, while we understand ERP system can certainly provide integrated view, however, it also depends on the efficiency and effectiveness of ERP system, and more importantly, how have we implemented? So if it is not implemented correctly, it gives more challenges to business, as internal modules are designed to provide integrated view, and they are tightly coupled. So if there's something is broken with an ERP, we see big side effects as well. I think this is not a question, it's mainly just an overview or an opinion. But what would be your feedback, Rob?
No, I think it's absolutely true that. So I've talked to businesses that have had challenges implementing an ERP from time to time. It generally comes down to the project direction. It comes down to, have we put the right resources into place? So if I go back to the late 90s, when I put SAP into places, we would go out to divisions of my organization at the time, and I'd more often than not be handed some people they could spare, rather than the people that actually knew the business well. And not surprisingly, you get compromised decisions if you do that. So implementations need to be an investment of the right people being able to share their knowledge, because ERP systems need that as such. So I think you get that project stuff right. I think the other side of this, though, is that more and more over the years, and I'm coming to the good ERP conversation here, you're seeing the guardrails being in place. So if we think about, let's get your data right, we've gone through a design phase, or we've confirmed what you're looking to do. And then we talk about, okay, this makes up a customer. We need these elements of information and so on. We go through the processes and understand what you're doing, or we show the processes that are available. And we align those to make sure that we're hitting those things. So there is no absolute perfect world as a result, but there's a lot you can do in the implementation side, and things that we're used to doing on a regular basis around dealing with complexity and nuances that can be accounted for. It is important, though, that successful ERP implementations are both of us. It's the customer and their people versus our people that are assisting with that. So I have this terminology that I talk about the project as us. It's never about the vendor, the implementation partner, or the customer. It's just us, the project. And I find that helps us get to a better way. The other thing is, experience and exposure over time means that we tend to have a pretty solid things that we've learnt, checklist that we make sure we cover off. And those things are important, because there are things that are about your business that will be the same as everybody else. And I still maintain purchasing is a great example, right? Raising a PO and having some approvals around that can be 3-layered or 4-layered, doesn't matter. That's pretty much the same as everybody else. Procurement, though, might be different. how you structure those buying arrangements and so on might be nuanced in your world compared to others, and it's being able to focus on those essentially. So the only other thing I'd say to this that I think is really relevant is I rarely talk to people that have put an ERP in and maybe not had the best experience in deploying that ERP for whatever reason. If I say to them, would you go back to what you had? The answer is rarely yes. There's one or two exceptions to that, and that probably says something to the people I talk to. The answer is I just never do it this way again, right? But where you end up in the long term in a good ERP structure and a unified solution is still a better place. It's just you could have had a better journey to get there, is my view. I hope that makes some sense. But again, happy to sort of have a bit more nuanced discussion around that.
Thanks, Rob, for that insight. So while we couldn't address all the questions during this live session due to time constraint, we'll make sure to follow up with those questions we didn't cover. So Rob will be compiling the remaining questions and providing detailed answers in our upcoming content pieces or through a personalized emails. So I think we've reached the end of our Q&A. So thank you for actively participating in our Q&A session. And we truly appreciate the questions and Rob's insightful responses. So we hope that you have enjoyed the webinar, Unlocking Tomorrow's Success, Streamlining Operations for Future Thinking Businesses. And before we finally end, any last message coming from Rob?
No, look, I think just the message for me is that these sessions are intended to start a conversation. So please, reach out. Let's have a conversation that makes sense for you and your business. It's okay that conversation doesn't end up doing things next to such, but I love talking to people. I'm really happy to sort of get a feel of where you're at and what you're doing and share some thoughts around that. And more often than not, there is some things that we should be doing or could be doing.
So we're always open to further discussion, and we'll be happy to connect with you in a one-on-one consultation with any of your specific concerns or questions. So again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a productive and successful journey in implementing business automation strategies within the business. So enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.